Hello and greetings to all of you, whichever day you find yourself in, whether it is Monday or Tuesday or somewhere between Monday and Tuesday. Greetings to all of your relations and to the lands that you sit upon. My name is Lynn Murphy, and I am delighted to be here today to be with Jeremy Lent and Mirian Vilela and to really sit with ecological civilization and this lovely new book, Making a World That Works for All of Us. And I have the honor to be both here with Jeremy and Miriam to moderate this session today and also to touch on some of the work that we do together. And before I introduce them, I want to just acknowledge and thank all of the co-organizers of this conversation here with us today, which is a collaboration of Earth Charter International, the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology, the Ecological Civilization Coalition, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and the Club of Rome. And if you are here from any of those institutions or efforts and collaborations, we warmly welcome you and thank you for sharing this with your networks and for being here today. As I said, my name is Lynn Murphy. I am the director of the Transition Resource Circle and the co-author of a book, Post-Capitalist Philanthropy, Healing Wealth in the Time of Collapse. And I have the honor to walk with Jeremy and Mirian as colleagues and dear friends and as allies. And so we're here today with Jeremy Lent, who is the author of this book that is coming out for some of us tomorrow, for some of us the day after tomorrow, that I showed Eco-Civilization, Making a World That Works for All of Us. And this is the newest book in a series that Jeremy has been writing that many of us find to be deeply relevant for our times and visionary. And in this latest one, I would say, is even the most both humble, rigorous, and ambitious simultaneously. And we'll get into that. So warmest welcomes, Jeremy, and thank you for being here with us. And we're joined by Mirian Vilela, who's the executive director of the Earth Charter International and the UNESCO Chair on Education for Sustainable Development. Both of them are members of the Club of Rome, and the three of us are part of the EcoCiv Coalition, which we'll say more about. And so just by way of introducing the topic and the conversations to all of you who are just joining us, I think if we are really present with whatever we feel when we wake up in the morning, whether it's checking the news, checking on our family, finding our way to work, really we're all feeling the crisis that we're living in and through. And many of us are looking for maps, guides, not just frameworks for intellectualizing, but ways that we can find what can we do and what are we doing that actually may be continuing what Jeremy talks about in the book as dominant culture, and what are ways that we can continue to align with some of the work I know that Earth Charter has been leading for decades now to align with an ecological based view of living, of being, of walking in accordance with life itself. And so it feels never more relevant, this conversation and the timeliness of this book, to really put a different idea in out there for the world that isn't just those of us who are in the know or those of us who are connected through some of the initiatives, but really for the world at large to really grapple with and to, as I said, with what Jeremy embodies, with the rigor and humility. And I would say some audacity for how we really do make a world that works for all of us. So thank you for being here with us today. And first we'll hear from Jeremy about the book, and then we'll hear from Mirian, and then They'll have some dialogue. We'll hear a little bit more about the work of the EcoCiv Coalition, and then we'll open it up for some questions from you all and find a way to come to close.
Well, Lynn, thanks so much for that. Love that that invitation you gave us to really feel into what is going on in the world today and what is possible. And what I'm going to do is take you through some prepared slides just to kind of share almost like a visual sense of what this is all about and what the book is actually about. And then, like Lynn said, we'll move more like to conversation and hopefully bring many of you into that conversation. So to begin with, I will share the screen. And well, as you can see, basically, this is what we'll be talking about, this book that is going to be launching officially tomorrow, Eco-Civilization, Making a World That Works for All. But I like to begin oftentimes this kind of view of what's going on, actually with a picture of the world itself, which makes particular sense today in this session where we're co-creating with the Earth Charter. Here is the Earth, our only home, and really the only place we know of in the entire universe right now where life exists, this beautiful, beautiful jewel in the middle of this darkness. And the amazing thing about one amazing thing about the Earth is that it's been around for like about 4.5 billion years, and life first emerged on this planet very early on. So here we are. There's been billions of years of life evolving this richness and abundance. And then just recently, really the last 70 or 100,000 years, one species came along that through its collective intelligence developed a technology and power to affect all of life on this earth. And how have we been doing? Well, I don't need to tell people here on this presentation, we're in massive crisis, right? We're approaching a breaking point. Whichever way we look, climate breakdown, ecological overshoot, socio-political breakdown, exponential change, technologically increased militarization. And of course, lots of people are trying to fix many things in this system. But most of the stuff that people are trying to fix is happening within the system itself. And this is because what we are living in right now is a world where, in this quote from Frederick Jameson, which I think is so powerful, it's easier to visualize the end of the world than it is the end of capitalism. And this book, in many ways, is designed to undo that deep insight that he says. So the book really offers the sense of a fundamentally different world system based on life-affirming principles rather than extraction, exploitation, and wealth accumulation, and shows that there is really a positive future available for us, and how every aspect of this entire system could be redesigned as a coherent whole. And what I'm going to do is kind of take you through the different sort of structures of the book. The book is divided into about 4 different sections, and I'll just touch on what each of these sections looks at, so you get a feel for where it's going. And the first one is actually called How Did We Get Here? And I'm not going to go into this in detail other than to show you this is what is distilled from all these, when we look at basically 500 years of capitalism and colonialism and everything that's come around, is the system isn't broken. For all the work that people try to do to fix the system, it's actually doing exactly what it was intended to do. And that's why what this book tries to do is show there is actually a fundamentally different system available to us. But to get there, it basically requires kind of changing the operating system of our entire world, if you will. If capitalism is the operating system right now, changing that to like an affirmation of life. And an important thing to understand about this book is that this vision of an eco-civilization is not one dreamed up by a few people, meeting in some smoke-filled room, coming up with some new plan to come up with a different world that would really work well. It's actually more than anything just an accumulation of an emerging vision from so many diverse sources. I won't go into all of these, but there's indigenous sources bringing us ideas like buen vivir, sumac rosé, or Ubuntu. And there's community sources, people in transition towns, permaculture groups, theories of the commons, in agroecology. And there's different spiritual movements from deep ecology to engage Buddhism, Christian liberation theology, traditional Chinese principles, and so many different political movements. All of these are actually working to move together towards a shared vision of what's possible, an eco-civilization. And so I'm going to spend a little bit more time on what are the principles of this eco-civilization. And I'm so particularly delighted to be here today because really we can see the Earth Charter itself as a moral foundation for what this whole book describes. And I write about that in the book itself. And if we look at those fundamentals of the Earth Charter that many of you will be familiar with, ecological integrity, social and economic justice, democracy, nonviolence, and peace, and respect and care for the community of life. Well, in general terms, really, these are the principles of an eco-civilization, basing our choices on our shared humanity with justice and dignity for all, emphasizing quality of life rather than material possessions, and building the human future, civilization's future, on the basis of symbiosis with the living earth, where the flourishing of the natural world is a foundational principle. And I'm going to go one level more into what that actually might look like to give you a more kind of tangible feeling of what are some of these principles that I talk about in the book and that really go through then what we're really looking at. And they kind of contrast with our dominant culture. So you can understand them better in this way. So our dominant culture is based on this notion of human supremacy, with giving humans the moral license to destroy ecosystems, mistreat non-humans. Eco-civilization starts with the intrinsic value of all life, honoring the sacredness of life and its right to thrive in healthy ecosystems. Our dominant culture gives primacy to capital. So our entire system is based on giving primacy. That's what capitalism basically is about. An eco-civilization would be about giving primacy to human dignity with everyone's right to flourish, setting the conditions for sustainable well-being rather than the commoditization and homogenization that we see in our dominant culture throughout the world now. And eco-civilization is really more like a pluriverse, and that fantastic word, which really emphasizes heterogeneity, diversity, recognizing that different cultures, different people have different pathways to the flourishing. In place of hierarchical structures with a wealth pump that centralizes power and domination by a small elite, an eco-civilization is based on something fundamentally different, subsidiarity, pushing power down to the lowest feasible level in the system. And in place of structural inequality, and neoliberalism tells us that's actually the morally good thing. It's based on structural equity, which means recognizing the historical patterns of injustice and dedicating the entire system to transforming them. And basically, instead of giving incentives for selfish behavior, which of course our dominant system does, it's looked at how you can design for cooperation with core design principles to reward pro-social behavior, which is basically exactly how humans evolved to flourish. So if those are the principles, most of the book actually goes into, and don't worry, I won't go into all this detail here, but just to show you, each chapter looks at different aspects of what is called, or what we might call civilization, and shows how they can fundamentally be different and changed. And just to give you like a brief taste of what that talks about, if you look at these different aspects of what we kind of think of as our world system, I won't even read them out, but you can just take a moment to look at some of these concepts like universal basic income, citizens' assemblies, disassembling the patriarchy, rights of nature, and some of these ideas of what actually gets explored in some detail in the book. And then the final section of the book is ask the question which all of us, any one of us ask, And especially if you've read the book and you're actually convinced, okay, this looks good. How do we get there from here? And there's a lot of deep stuff that maybe we can explore more in conversation today. But there's one concept that goes through the entire book, which is one that comes from a model of change, which is often used when thinking about transformation, which is called the three horizons model of change. So to get a feeling of what that means, like imagine that you are walking um, in an unmapped territory. You don't know anything about it other than you want to get to some very some sort of distant horizon that is very different from where you are right now. And what this model of change describes is three horizons for how you might be looking at things. The first horizon, basically, you want to make sure you don't trip over. You've got to be looking down, especially you don't know the terrain. What is that? What's coming next? Is there a ditch coming up? So if we translate that into what we do for change making, we can think that it's sort of things like keeping the lights on, which tends to maintain the status quo, even though we're trying to improve things. Like it might be things like, invest more in renewables, increase taxes on the wealthy, good things that need to be done, but basically stay within exactly what our dominant system is. The second horizon looks at more like what's kind of beyond a little bit that those sort of gray areas, those mountains we see there, which we can think of as disruptive innovation. So this is stuff that transforms what we're used to. But the question is, where does it lead? So an example of a second horizon um, kind of icon really would be something like Tesla, like which looks at going beyond just renewables, but transforming how we think about automobiles to a fully electric car and all that kind of stuff. But it stays within the same dominant system, right? With a billionaire owner, and then and then like extraction and the same exploitation, and basically just another way of extracting from the world, but still looking transformative and attractive. But some second horizon pathways might lead towards that third horizon. And that third horizon is almost like what is beyond even what you can see right there. But it's this vision that we kind of share of some sort of transformed society. And the question is, what are its contours? And if we have a rough sense of what it might be looking like and where it might be going, then maybe when we're in that first and second horizon, it might help us to figure out the direction we might want to take in those mountains beyond. So in the book, I actually, for every one of those chapters I showed you, I put out these ideas of contours for what a second horizon or a third horizon might look like. But importantly, these are contours. These are not blueprints. And every one of these pages ends with this question: what are the second and third horizon ideas arising in your mind, inspired by this chapter? Because this is something that we all are being called on to co-create as we move together. So finally, this kind of way of thinking about where we're going on this really looks at this kind of unraveling that we're all experiencing. And it's a terrifying time we're in right now. Are we headed for total collapse? Are we headed for all kinds of like partial collapses? What's actually going on? But we know that our civilizational system right now is definitely unraveling. And really, this kind of defines, in a way, what is the challenge and the invitation for all of us. It's almost like imagining a rug that was really tightly woven, but suddenly the threads themselves are kind of coming looser and looser. And this is what we're all called upon to try to do, is to see if we can reweave that society's fabric, even as it does that unraveling, into this life-affirming future that we all want so much. So I'm going to stop the share here, and hopefully that just gives you a little bit of a flavor for what this what this book and what all this work is really about.
Thank you, Jeremy. And again, since I have the honor to have this book sitting in front of me, it's very thick. And so it goes into great detail and is just a really brilliant. It's rare that we get such breadth and depth with such rigor to both the ontological assumptions and a really rigorous survey and still keep looking towards that third horizon. So
Mm.
I'm going to turn it to Mirian to just speak about the work that you've been walking with for some decades now at Earth Charter, and also the seat you have within the EcoCiv Coalition. If you want to go there, we'll get there, and then have some questions for Jeremy to go deeper.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Jeremy. It's a good opportunity to be together here in this space we have co-created. And first of all, I want to congratulate Jeremy on this new book. It's a huge effort just to make it happen. So congratulations, because I think it's a very timely new book. For me, it's also a refreshing and powerful contribution to help us, that invites us to envision a possible new future.
Mm.
I think it's one of the challenges actually of our time is to get different generations, actually, various different generations, young and old, middle age, whatever, different generations and people across cultures, different contexts to collectively think, to collectively envision that a possible new future can take place. In a new
Mhm.
future that is not necessarily, doesn't need to be far away, a faraway future. When we talk about envision a possible new future, sometimes
Mhm.
we think it's something far away. But in this particular case, it could emerge anytime.
Mhm.
So we congratulate you for offering valuable insights, not only on the crisis that the current world lives through with this book, but offering insights on in the possibility, into the possibilities of how to make it happen.
Mm.
Um, I have a question on collaboration. How you
Yeah.
envision the new kinds of collaboration that is required for, and then we can talk about the Earth Charter and the coalition later. But
Uh-huh.
first question for you is around the word of collaboration, because many of us are involved in various different movements, efforts, be it different projects to transform education or to transform systems, governance, the UN, and etc. And you articulate some ideas around collaboration.
Mhm.
In the book. So I think it's a key principle, but collaboration across generations. How should we envision collaboration? Because you just mentioned that people are working collaboratively across different movements, and sometimes I doubt that we're working
Yeah.
collaborative through across different movements. We do have valuable movements across the world.
Mhm.
Um, um, but there are all various valuable movements that are working towards social change, but
Right.
there are a lot of borders within their like islands of coherence maybe, but they are
Mhm.
not necessarily collaborating. So how would you envision in this new civilization that we can collectively envision here, but through your book and your thinking around this, a new level, a higher level of collaboration across generations, but also across movements that are working towards
Mm.
this social change. How to make
Yeah.
that kind of collaboration happen?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Miriam. It's a huge challenge, which of course many of us are only too familiar with, just as you're describing. And me, I take a lot of my vision from kind of understanding really that systems biologists, people who have looked at essentially the philosophy of life itself, have have talked about. And actually, it's something I describe a little bit more in the prior book, The Web of Meaning, which looks at some of these really core concepts about how does life work. And a key concept is known as reciprocal causality. So I'll explain what that means, because basically this is how life itself evolved all the way billions of years ago on Earth, where different parts were trying to metabolize energy from the earth, even before life itself happened. And when life actually began to spontaneously emerge on Earth, it's because these different parts worked together as a coherent system. So they became a system as a whole, even while each of the different parts were doing their own things. And that was almost like the emergence of life. And this notion of reciprocal causality really looks at how any living system actually works and how it can work in a healthy way. And so what that means when we're thinking about something like our movements for change making is that there is almost like a coherence, a system as a whole, and there's also the individual parts. And so there are oftentimes two sort of mistakes or two ways we can go wrong when we're looking at the whole sort of change making system. One is people who come up with notions of, I've got the answer. Now everyone's got to do what I do. And and it's called whatever. It's called communism, or it's called this, or it's called that. And either you agree or you don't. And that's why I was emphasizing in this presentation I just gave, this is not a blueprint. I'm not claiming any answers to any of this, but almost like there's opportunities and frameworks for that. So that's one mistake that things can go wrong. It can go wrong in the other direction too, where we kind of say, okay, each group, each person has got to do their own thing. Like sometimes like let 1,000 flowers bloom, and like that'll emerge, something will come out of that. But that's not actually how complex systems and life actually works. It works through that process of integration, which is precisely arising from that reciprocal causality. There's like when I have all these cells in my body, my different organs and totally different kinds of cells, they work together because they go, okay, I'm part of Jeremy. But they're also doing their very different things. This is what we need, is to basically give what I call in the book like a shared manifold of meaning, which is not imposing meaning on anyone, but just distilling the meaning that everyone basically shares, which in this case, we can think of as really an affirmation of life. We were talking about what's the underlying operating system of this new eco-civilization, basically an affirmation of life that I'm guessing that anyone in this group today would say, absolutely, this is a basis for me. And within that, that can work in so many different ways. But in each case, as we're doing our own unique thing, working in a particular group or a movement, one of the most important things is to look at how we can actually learn another secret of life, which is like mutually beneficial symbiosis. How can we actually work closely with other groups around us, which are not like sacrificing our time for their benefit, but in ways that actually work for us and work for them so we can create something more powerful together?
If I may add, we understand, many of us, that there are different groups working with the idea of ecological civilization, and one coming from China as a
Mhm.
government, and the importance for us to bring together these movements of social change in general, but also even within that, different efforts around the effort of ecological civilization, and therefore more and more efforts to come together on a Eastern and Western sort of dialogue
Right.
around
Mhm.
how to move forward with this narrative around ecological civilization. How
Mhm.
do you see that kind of bridge making happening?
Yes, that's actually one of the biggest opportunities I feel that the whole vision of ecological civilization offers. And as we all know only too well right now, we're in a world right now with these horrendous nationalistic divisions that, in the West, and people pointing at China, saying they're the enemy, they're the rival. And when people are developing AI now, they're saying, we've got to develop it before China gets more ahead of us. And of course, China looking at that and relates to that and sees something similar and recognize that it has an existential threat that it has to work on in that regard. But so many of us want to get past that thing is called like a multipolar trap, and that sort of zero-sum game where groups are fighting against each other. And the vision of an ecological civilization gives us such an opportunity around that, because of course, China has a heritage now of having developed these ideas for many decades. And within the Chinese culture, some of these core operating system changes I'm talking about that's needed in the West, such as moving from seeing nature as a machine to seeing ourselves as part of nature, that's always been there in deep traditional Chinese culture. There's so much that those of us in the West can learn from those deeper insights, which relates so much more to how we evolved as human beings and what indigenous groups believe. And this possibility that maybe the vision of an ecological civilization can begin to speak to different groups, to groups in the West, groups in the global South, in the majority world, as well as China. So we can begin to form together something that can go beyond these kind of nation state divisions into some sense of a shared humanity that we can move towards.
Mhm. Maybe one last point I must say, I am of course very happy to see that you have looked at their chart as you write in this book,
Hmm.
and considered it as a solid ethical foundation or
Hmm.
maybe guide for this effort of building a new narrative around ecological civilization. Um, and I think it's a rather than creating the will, is building on it and moving forward. So I appreciate the way you put that. In my last point, and I'll give back the floor back to Lynn
Hmm.
for moving forward with this. It's on this invitation for us to nurture our ability to make the impossible possible.
Hmm.
Um, Currently, there are a lot of people with a feeling of despair,
Hmm.
but also negativity
Hmm.
for good reasons, given what's happening in the world. And I want to thank you for in the book for not limiting the space of the book to solely focus on collapse and dysfunction, but in exploring the values, institutions, and cultural shifts that are needed to build an ecological civilization. But I feel myself quite inspired that over the past few months and even just a month or two, we have experienced or heard several important historical landmarks that for me, they're fuels or they contribute to this effort of building a new narrative. And I want to mention, I think, two or three of them.
Yeah.
One is this idea that sounded impossible 10 years ago, and now it's possible. It's this what happened around the international conference in Colombia just a
Mm.
month
Hmm.
ago,
Yeah.
that advanced discussions on a practical roadmap for transforming or for helping us all to think that it is possible to transition away from
Hmm.
fossil fuels in a sort of new arena. It's not really the UN, it's mixed with governments, mixed with non-state actors. So I see that as a good concrete example of making the impossible possible. Um,
Yes.
the second one is what happened just last week at the United Nations General Assembly, that the UN adopted a new resolution endorsing what the International Court of Justice approved or adopted as a decision that makes states responsible to tackle climate change. So these are
Mm.
just two examples of things that happened within
Hmm.
the sphere of a month that I think helps to open the doors and the
Hmm.
path for this effort. And the last one is something that just happened this today, and I think will generate good positive ripple effects. The Pope's new encyclical
Oh, yes.
that was launched today. I think it's also historical because in this he again reinforces the importance of an ethical imperative of bringing back ethics into education. Um, so these are just three examples that of things that emerged in the last months or so, 2 months, that I think contribute to this thinking of making the impossible possible. As much as we can, again, build bridges of collaboration across these different efforts and not see things in isolation. So I'm mentioning this because I see the effort you have put into putting together this book, not
Mhm.
isolated from uh, efforts around the Earth Charter or these other efforts that I just mentioned. Could you just mention
Right.
how you see the linkages between your book and these
Mm.
other things that are currently happening that kind of, oh, we see some major important change emerging?
Yes, I think these are these are almost a sense of the sort of glimmers of what is actually possible. And I think one of the things that's important to take from what you're saying is they're coming from different sources. It's not just like one one group. Here are the people who are doing the work. The first example was actually nation states getting together, smaller, more moderate-sized nation states, and saying this system does not work and we're not going to accept that. And so here, like 80 different nation states come together and say, let's look at what is actually possible. So this is a fabulous example of, in a way, it's almost like how we evolved as human beings was, in hunter-gatherer bands, we developed the commons and self-organization, and some big dude would get too big for his britches. And the rest of the people would come together and say, we're not accepting that. We're going to work together collaboratively to do something different. And here we are having an example of that on the sort of global stage as a different kind of system. And that other example of the UN is a fabulous example of something that actually happens within the system itself that has been developed, but it can actually change when the right energies and the right forces go through it. And then the third one is a great example of something coming. We were talking before about that vision of an eco-civilization coming from all different sources, coming from a spiritual source. And it's so wonderful. It then builds on the Laudato Si from years earlier that Pope Francis put out, which gives such a fabulous spiritual um, sense of direction to billions of people around the world of what's possible. So I think what is so important here is that notion of the interconnection between things. And this is really what I try to show in the book. That notion, when I was just talking about reweaving society, it's also having all these different strands of change reweaving together, coming from spiritual sources. And many other areas and strengths come from grassroots, people on the ground doing their stuff, whether it's in agroecology or citizen assemblies or many other kind of approaches. But it's tying them together. It's not saying, oh, change will only happen through a spiritual shift or will only happen from the people or will only happen from the centers of power. But it's connecting those changes together. That's what actually can lead to a true transformation.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Mirian. And yeah, for pointing to both those examples and also
Mhm.
speaking to the context with where we are. And I think what you're hearing with what Mirian and Jeremy were discussing, and what I saw in some of the questions coming up in the chat is that really the ambition here is not just to have a philosophical idea out there, but it's how to bring the notions beyond just the discourse, but how to bring the values and the rigor of this into the so-called mainstream, into the current polity, and then find where the edges for other ways and true, in my parlance, might be transformation or what actually is it. And Jeremy's really relying on deep science to help us really understand what are those mechanisms for transformation within the polity. We're going to get to some of the other incredible ambition that Jeremy has been up to on the EcoCiv Coalition that will, I think, reflect some of the questions. But before I do that, I really want to honor that we have Mamphela Ramphele, and pardon if I said the name wrong. We've not had the honor to meet before, but who's the honorary chair of the Club of Rome and the chair of the Institute for EcoCiv. And she's with us here. I see her hand raised, and I was wanting to turn to you to ask for a comment, a question, and to join us in this conversation. I think you're on mute. Yeah.
Mine is to celebrate Jeremy. I mean, I grew up as a child of teachers, so I learned to read. So I couldn't believe that one human being not only produced the old books that all of you know about, but this is a labor of love. This man has done an incredible job of reading every document you can think about in terms of thinking about how societies work and how systems work. And I'm a great beneficiary because I'm here to write a book, so I don't have to go and read Plato. I just, or Aristotle. I just have to look at what he's got and acknowledge it. So my first comment is thank you, Jeremy. You are a model of what being a responsible global citizen is about. The second point I want to make, which I think has not been emphasized enough, neither by you nor by Miriam. You have unveiled Tina, the version of evil, not the Virgin Mary. Tina is what has kept us where we are, which is it is not possible. There is no alternative. There is no alternative. Now, I was a young professional when Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were at their absolute height. And I think we underestimate the impact they've had. So what we talk about making the impossible possible, some of the impossibles have always been possible. But because of Tina, we thought it's not possible. And so you have unveiled her. And so I think you have opened the doors for people to reimagine. To reimagine what it means to be human. Because what you are talking about in terms of whether it's collaboration, whether it's, I think one part which needs to be strengthened in our discussions and thinking about this big transformational process that we owe to those yet to be born is to understand who we were designed to be as human beings. We are not just an accident of energies coming together and so on. We have a value system which reflects this very respect for life is ingrained in us. But Tina came and took it out, or in what remained, Tina put some whatever soda powder on it so that it dissolves. Human beings are inherently born to be collaborative, to be interconnected, to be interdependent. And when you think about your happiest moment in life. It's not when you won the lottery, or it's when you feel you are in the company of loving, supportive relationships.
Yes.
That's what Tina took away from us. And we allowed that. Now, Tina was simply expressing what had happened, because you do a brilliant job in being very honest about the impact of colonial conquest, which the world doesn't talk about it. It's like, if Mamphela talks about, oh, there she goes again. I'm sorry. If I trample on your toe with a corn, you can go to the podiatrist but until I come back to you and say, I am sorry, Jeremy, that I trampled on you. The
Exactly.
relationship that was broken by my cruelty
Yes.
cannot be repaired without my saying, I'm sorry. And so I'm glad that we are amongst friends and fellow citizens of the world who are really committed to a different future. But I want us to be bolder. I want us to be bolder than just simply going through the first, second, and third horizon. I think we need to fly directly to the third horizon. No, I'm very serious. And Unveil, Tina. There is no need for us to continue business as usual. And what Miriam has told us is that the spirit is afoot. What people thought was not possible is unfolding. I was in Colombia when this thing about ending fossil fuel was talked about. And it's not magic. We have the technology, we know how to do it. But Tina stands in our right in front of us, and we think,
yes, exactly.
And so I just want to congratulate you, my brother, and say, let us be bolder. Yeah. Because I believe we need to reimagine freedom for a people who have rediscovered who they are. And who we are an interconnected, interdependent people who adores the ecosystems, because our common ancient ancestors from where I come from in Africa understood that. Yeah. Now, Miriam, just a little, what do you call it? Pepper. I'm very admiring of China and its ecological system. But you cannot have ecological system in China and come to South Africa and come and poison our ecosystems, or go to Congo and destroy the second biggest land, now the biggest land, because the Amazon they've destroyed. Okay. So if we're talking ecosystems, they are not for South Africa or America. They have to be for the globe, because it is interconnected. So yes, China technically talks about it, but they have to live it in terms of everything at the local, at the national, at the global. Thank you, Jeremy.
Mamphela, thank you. Thank you so much. So much wisdom and so many different dimensions that you bring into the conversation. And perhaps I can riff off a couple of things you said, because there's so much richness there. Maybe like kind of three things. One is just this whole notion of the importance of recognizing injustice. That it's not just a matter of looking forward, and not even just a matter of looking at repairing the relationship of humanity with the earth and with our more than human relatives, but within human society, it's recognizing there's 500 years of structural violence, injustice that is so embedded in every single element of this system that without recognizing that and absolutely committing to that, a lot of that transformation, we will never get to this kind of eco-civilization we're talking about. So that's so crucial to get that place that's right. And just to touch on another point you made, Mamphela, about really it's kind of like a return to who we are. This is how we evolved as human beings, to be collaborative, to be cooperative, just as you're describing. And I want to just lift up, a comment that I saw in the chat on that topic, like from Hiba Malik. Thank you for that. Pointing out about actually the Indus Valley civilization, which is absolutely fascinating, because oftentimes we think of as civilizations have always been these wealth pumps, these hierarchical, the destructive extraction, exploitation machines, which is almost always true, with this likely exception of Harappan civilization, exactly as you point out, where archaeologists have seen that it was designed seemingly without these monumental palaces, and it was designed actually with rational street design, looking like it was optimizing for everybody rather than just a small minority. So that is a great example showing what is possible. We're not stuck in this inevitability of this kind of civilizational system. So I think that's great. And I think really just to come to that biggest point maybe of all you were saying, Mamphela, is about boldness. And it is a limitation to this three horizons model, which I think is very valuable in some cases, but also it gives a sense that it's like step by step and how long will it take to get there. And I know, Lynn, you and I have had conversations about this, and I love, you've got this image of what about a mycelial underground pathways which go directly to that third horizon and can bypass some of those, all those different changes. And there's this other metaphor that's already been mentioned, but this notion of islands of coherence, this sense that as this whole civilization is unraveling, these islands of coherence, they basically are third horizons in the current situation right now. They're groups of people, and they can be large groups, like, say, La Via Campesina, very, very large groups, millions of peasants around the world. And they can be small groups working in a permaculture group. They can be indigenous groups, such as the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance. But these are islands of coherence that are prefiguring that third horizon, if you will. They're living or working or both according to those values. And I think one of the most important elements of this transformational change is actually in really, really putting our energies into being part of those ourselves, and also connecting up those islands. So as this system really does unravel, and it can happen way sooner and way faster, maybe than many people think, and there can be a different kind of mainland there that we can actually begin to build on together for that life-affirming future.
Jeremy, that's a perfect way for me to bridge what Mamphela's comments are with putting everything out before I ask and others here can engage, which is this boldness. What is it actually about human nature, and what are we looking at for civilizational scale? And here, Jeremy, the past few years has not only been writing this book and visualizing this book, but Jeremy was the founding member of what I've referenced a couple of times of the EcoCiv Coalition. And I just would love for you, Jeremy, to speak about the EcoCiv Coalition, the purpose. In a way, it feels like a direct response to what Mamphela was calling for, of just boldness, and then in a way it touches on what Mirian brought in about the importance of collaboration, and the importance of collaboration of not just those who immediately agree with us, but continuing to stay it and see how we're really working towards such an ambitious project. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that invitation then. And really, I also, before even talking about it, just want to thank the three of you who've been talking today, Mirian and Lynn and Mamphela, for putting so much of your own life's energy and inspiration and ideas into building this coalition that we've now been around for getting on like to 2 to 3 years. And really, I can explain a little bit just from my own personal journey, that as I was trying to starting work on this vision of an eco-civilization years ago, it wasn't my vision. When I came across it, I was so inspired by it that I wanted to write this book around it. But then it was really important, like we don't just need just another book, but we've got to actually make this actionable. We've got to really be doing something about it. And so over the last few years, a number of us have begun to actually build something, which I'll just share a couple of slides to take you through it, and then we can talk about it in a little bit more detail, if that's okay. So if you remember in that slideshow, I was leaving before I left with this slide of reweaving society's fabric, even as it unravels from its own internal contradictions, is our sort of challenge, if you will. And what this Eco-Civilization Coalition is about is a group of people working really leading change makers, working to foster the emergence of that life-affirming future out of the deteriorating chaos of our times. And you can think of us as we've developed like a statement of purpose, which starts off like we are people who have come together united in our commitment to co-create a life-affirming, ecologically grounded, deeply democratic world. The sense that a different world isn't just possible, but actually already exists at the margins and is beginning to take root, and that we're devoted to nurturing these shoots. And so a lot of the idea around this coalition is not to create yet another movement along with the thousands that are already out there to say we're going to do this or that, but almost more to be the connective tissue for the groups already doing the stuff on the ground. Mirian was asking earlier and talking about the sort of theory of change, if you will. How can we be most effective? And the sense that we, and many people have had over the years, is that this movement needs that connective tissue. Again, not a group of people saying, we got the answers, do what we do, but a group of people saying, how can we amplify what is already being done? So we've developed at this point, now we're now about a team of, they're basically 16 or 17 core members. We've now got about 15 or so people volunteering, working part-time, significant strategic action sort of working groups. We have the Institute, of which Mamphela is the chair of, all working in this kind of broader coalition, and roughly 50 advisory partners, many of whom represent some of the leading entities that many of us know and respect, making change in the world. And there are three primary strategies, and then I'll stop talking about it for the slides. But one is to shift the mainstream narrative, to actually get some of these third horizon ideas that are considered totally unthinkable for most people in the media and the mainstream media today or whatever, to actually get them injected in mainstream discourse. So these ideas around a life-affirming civilization can actually begin to become part of what is normally talked about. That second strategy is we call amplifying the movement for transformative change, recognizing that there are thousands of different groups working around the world in different elements of what we call civilization, doing the transformative work. So it's helping them to find places of mutually beneficial symbiosis, working with other groups so that the system as a whole basically can get to begin to see itself as a system and be more effective in a self-reinforcing way. And the third is to uplift those islands of coherence that we're calling eco-civilization pathfinders, those groups already doing the stuff. But what they're doing is so different from the mainstream culture that they're always facing incredible headwinds, basically making it very difficult for them to thrive and keep growing. But so there is the notion of figuring out, trying to help, like how can resources be allocated to the groups, the resources that they need, and how can they, as they learn different things, share them fractally, or we call fractal scaling, with other groups around the world, so the principles can be shared while each group does its own unique thing. And we have a website, which you can find at called ecociv.org. And I'll stop sharing this now. But if you go to the website, you'll be prompted to join our newsletter. And if you'd like to get more involved, there's actually a get involved page there where you can fill out a form and share your skills, share what you'd like to do, because we're beginning to really build our energy on volunteer energy, on basically a grassroots self-organized movement for this change.
Thank you, Jeremy, for both the ambition of the book and the huge congratulations there, and also being the founding member of this coalition and truly working in the spirit of coalition and collaboration and growing, and all that it takes to just pour your life and life force into this endeavor. Mirian, before I ask a couple questions and we open it up to others, I wonder if you want to add anything to either the EcoCiv Coalition and or from your perspective as someone who's really been leading the charge in this area for a couple decades. what do you see relevant right now within the EcoCiv Coalition and how it's responding to what some of us call the meta crisis or the poly crisis and others might call the perma crisis that we've been in?
Well, from a nurse charter perspective in the work we do, I see it as a contribution to the coalition of Ecological Civilization Coalition. We have a very strong focus on education, envisioning the importance of reimagining, transforming education, so that education really could contribute to that, to what we are saying here. We can build collaborations, we can influence policy making at the UN. I mean, there are different doors through which we can make it happen. But from our perspective, we make a decision to focus on transforming education from different angles. But just to conclude here, I don't want to take too much space. I think our generation has the responsibility to not only trigger the effort of envisioning a different kind of civilization, and I think this book and other efforts are working towards that, but also to build a path for that. So envisioning is one effort, contributing to this building of a narrative, but also build the path and demonstrate that we can collaborate with resolve in ways that we can make it happen collaboratively across generations, across different movements, across cultures. And for me, making the vision of that or making it happen through the lens of the Earth Charter, one door, or the Earth Charter International, one door is through transforming education and enhancing and empowering education institutions to embed this vision. So for me, just to conclude here, envisioning it through the lens of their charter means building a society that naturally acts, not forcefully, but naturally acts in a caring, respectful, empathetic relationship with one another and the large living world or the community of life. So for that to happen, we need to transform education. So for me, a key component in making all of that happen is having the capacity to scale up and move forward using their charter as a solid ethical foundation, but also as an educational instrument to help all of us to make the impossible sound possible and work towards that.
Thank you, Mirian, and thank you for continuing to sit in the seat and stay leading the charge for so long and in some ways, wait for others to catch up. And in that way, perhaps I'll ask just an initial question for Jeremy, and then can open for others. And I'm sitting with how best to situate this question. And in the book, there's different references to different notions of fractal flourishing or fractal scaling or the unravelings. And you do a really beautiful job of synthesizing a lot of insights that look at, I might say, deep time and look at the civilizational project and the evolutionary biology and the science and many insights. And then more recently with the spread of neoliberalism and the way that many of the current kind of waters that we swim in politically became kind of the taken for granted geopolitical forces. Margaret Thatcher was invoked. And then this notion of moving towards the horizons in some way looks at how do we reorient our civilization towards a future that is rooted in affirming of life. And so in some ways, I want to ask the question for you of like, what time is it? Or when are we? Or how are we in this present moment? And there's many different ways we could look at this. We could look at is this essentially the current context one where the climate and the cascading meta crisis, poly crisis is accelerating, that the what time it is that we are in some sort of the unraveling and the raveling are happening simultaneously. It could be that we really need to understand more of our contextual relevance ever more. But I wanted to bring in the when are we and what time is it, and really ask you to comment a little on how do we be present, and how in that state, how do we continue to walk towards an ecological civilization?
Yeah. Thank you. And I yeah, I really appreciate this sense of what time is it. And what was coming to my mind is actually I was fortunate just a few weeks ago to be in conversation with the chair of the committee of the Doomsday Clock, this incredible astrophysicist who's got this this mind-blowing like way of understanding things. And what the people there in the Doomsday Clock committee tell us is it's 89 seconds to midnight. And that is the closest, far and away the closest to midnight we've ever been, including times when there was terror around the world about possible nuclear, nuclear war and devastation, everything else, because those threats are still there, along with the threat of runaway AI and the threat of this breaking apart of whatever fragile kind of system of management between nation states was sort of held together for decades. So that's a really terrifying thing to look at clearly. And I think one of the important things I want to get clear about the message of this book, and really my own lived reality, my own experience every day, is this is not about sort of hopium, or it's not about just kind of blind optimism saying, don't worry, everything will be okay. Look at these islands of coherence. Look at the stuff we're doing. Things might be scary and unraveling, but it will be okay. We don't know that it will be okay. And in fact, I've got parts within me quite, significant. Look at everything that's going on and put the pieces together and say, no, we're actually headed at a rapid increasing rate, either towards some kind of collapse or some kind of transformation that will not be for that flourishing. One thing almost everyone who looks at these this big picture spaces kind of agrees on is really there's only been a couple of major phase transitions in all of the human experience ever since we evolved as humans that have transformed every aspect of that lived experience of what it means to be a human being. We spent like 95+% of our human heritage as nomadic hunter-gatherers. That all changed. It took a few thousand years, but that all changed with the rise of sedentism and agriculture and big civilizations. Then the scientific revolution came a few hundred years ago. And that took maybe a couple of hundred years, really. But through colonialism, that transformed almost everybody's experience than what had gone before. Pretty much everyone agrees we're entering something that's every bit as massive a transformation, if not even greater than that, this century. And none of us know where that's going to go. So we are very, very close to the end of something. But to me, this is what really, as I've been talking about, this notion of unraveling kind of defines what we're about. None of us actually know if that collapse is going to take place a month from now, a year from now, 10 years from now. And we can see very quick. I mean, I'm quite close with a number of AI focused technologists who are right there in Silicon Valley, who care about life, just like we do here in this group, who are absolutely trying to get the message out. We are potentially headed for such a runaway, speedy devastation. We've got to be aware of that and put the brakes on these things. That's just one element of what we're looking at. But this is, to me, what I answer to myself or to anyone when they ask me what time is it. I don't have a clue. And what I do know, and this is really arises from systems thinking, this is not coming out of ignorance of what's going on. It's knowing that in systems, in complex nonlinear systems, there is no inevitability about anything. That it's absolutely intrinsically unpredictable because of the complex nonlinear ways in which things work. And to me, that is what gives us, and me personally, the hope. because we can lean into that mystery. Because none of us know where we're going, all of us do know what we actually have within us each day. We all know that here we are in this miracle of life, and life's given us this miracle of consciousness. And from many of us, like on this call today, given us the unearned privilege of having some power to affect what goes on in the world, maybe beyond what we even should, based on a sense of fairness, whatever. But from those elements, that's what we know. And we can know that each day we can devote ourselves without knowing what the outcome is, without having attachment to it. We can devote ourselves to what we know life is calling from us, to really give ourselves to this possibility.
Thank you, Jeremy. Just with being with the profundity of what you just offered, it's really speaking to the heart of what I often will call the spiritual political praxis, as a way of being, as a way of seeing, as a way of doing, as a way of living. We wanted to open it and see if there's one or two questions out there from you all, and maybe just so I can try to see through it. If you could put your hand up, that will help me see. Yeah. And I'm seeing questions. I'm going to start with Ananta because they had the wherewithal, but I would ask if you could come on camera if it's possible so we can see you as well. And then I saw Vilela and Sean's hands as well. So, yeah.
Thank you, dear Lynn, and thank you, Miriam, Jeremy, Mamphela, and all friends. Now, technology also is limiting somehow. My camera is meditating, and
That's great.
it does not want to wake up. And again, thank you for this very deep co-journey. One interlinked submission is the perennial reality of power and suffering. And these are realities, but as Jeremy and friends have suggested, that we have also worked with it in different ways. And for example, historically, we have cultivated different modality of power and power sharing, and also suffering. And this is a point that the great Toynbee had raised. And I want to bring this challenge of power and suffering, and that how the dominant, constellation of power has created suffering, and the response to that, along with Buddha, is not only to acknowledge suffering, but also cultivate different modalities of voluntary suffering, not in a masochistic way, but voluntary suffering precisely to plant seeds of new civilizations. And here, therefore, what is hinted at, but what requires further cultivation, is the work on trans-civilizational dialogues, and including suggested dialogue between West and China. And the civilizations today are not just known through visible civilizational markers, because there are many civilizations, for example, our primal civilizations, they do not have the same kind of marker as Indic or Chinese, but we also need to enter deeply into trans-civilizational dialogues and how it can be linked to the important challenge that Miriam has articulated through education. that have our educational spaces become very, very, creative hubs of trans-civilizational dialogue. Social science, one important factor here is still suffering not only from colonial domination, but with a little bit of superficial decolonization. Still, it is suffering from what the burden of Euro-American exclusiveness. So in everything, not only social science, and finally, that co-suffering enriched by trans-civilizational realization, as Sri Aurobindo from India has said, that the whole reality of Sachidananda, that means truth, bliss, and consciousness, even in an evolutionary way, truth, bliss, and consciousness have been our co-workers. And today, how do we move towards civilizations of Sachidananda, truth, bliss, and consciousness in the midst of falsehood and misery and destructions of many kinds? Thank you for your kind considerations.
Thank you so much for that rich question. And just in the interest of time, Jeremy, I was going to ask for the other two questions and then just have you, respond as a whole. And thank you for that rich offering and question. And in our shared economy of time, if we can keep the questions lean so we can close in a good way. So, the next one who has their hand raised, Sean or Abelardo.
Thank you. And I'll be very brief. I already put the question in the chat, so it's basically that same question. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for the great book, which I've been looking forward to, and I'm especially interested in exploring the coalition's work to work specifically on this planetary governance question relating to breaking through the bottlenecks that are keeping us from addressing the planetary collective action problems, like just getting to a successful progress on the SDGs. We realize, I think, that the UN framework has not been very good at making progress toward our goals for sustainable development. So, in what ways will the coalition basically be supporting efforts to build a new kind of supplemental governance framework, especially with non-governmental organizations and movements that can provide the push to the UN for addressing the problems that it hasn't been able to solve on its own? Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks.
And Abelardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Jeremy, I will just reflect a little bit on your last intervention where you talked about your consciousness of the unraveling that's happening. And I found that very sobering and very stimulating. And I've been trying to follow the current world war that's happening as much as possible to understand. It's so difficult to really understand, but there's one aspect which has to do with the Western capitalist addiction to fossil fuels, and that Iran, and also with some complicity of Russia, China, they are transforming the whole petro-dollar system, and in many of the countries that are suffering from this, you see people really having to struggle in their daily lives to live with less and with so much uncertainty. So, what do you think about that level of understanding? And also in this context, I think this relates to the first gentleman's comments about the role of other civilizations. Because some people talk about how much the ancient Persian Zoroastrian traditions, for example, are somehow present in their consciousness genes, and the collectivism of China as well. How they might be foreseeing a process of evolution out of this unraveling, which is bearing in mind all of this addiction to the fossil fuels. If we don't, we have to be weaned, I think, from this addiction. What do you think of that?
Yes, so true, so true. Thanks. Well, maybe I'll answer the questions in reverse order, beginning with you, Vilela, and then ending, and then to Sean, and then to Ananta's point. And absolutely about this addiction. And what's so crazed is that while our whole society is so addicted to fossil fuels, we actually, taxpayers in different countries in the global north and all else are spending trillions of dollars subsidizing those fossil fuel companies to continue to do this destructive thing they're doing, even while they're making so much money on top of everything else, because of the systems of power where they have a stranglehold over the same governmental legislators and policymakers that that then give them what they want, which is why what Mirian was talking about earlier is such a potential breakthrough, what happened in Colombia, because here is a group of mid-sized countries, about 80 of them or more, saying, we're not taking this crap anymore. We're going to do something in a different way. And that's where I feel the hope is, to begin to break that addiction to the fossil fuel. And let me turn now, just in the interest of time, like to what Sean said, and then finish with Ananta, and then go back to you, Lynn. But Sean, you raised very, very big questions about global governance, and I have one of the chapters in my book is devoted to that. And in many ways, I see that almost like the most challenging of any of the different massive problems we're facing, because some of these issues are so embedded, and the amount of the changes in power structures that need to happen are so vast. But where I see the real opportunities is actually coming from, and we were talking before about the third horizon existing right now in the first horizon or whatever, these islands of coherence. Citizens' assemblies are an incredibly powerful movement towards shifting some of these power dynamics. And these are basically, for people who don't know, assemblies chosen of ordinary people, chosen by sortition, basically randomly, that are facilitated and that devote sometimes months to considering big questions. And when ordinary people get together in these kind of ways, magic happens. And basically, it's not magic, it's turning back to who we are as human beings, connecting with each other in non-polarized ways. And there's even a group actually who has developed a global citizens assembly. And I think we are in a whiteboard space right now, but I think we can probably change that. But which is devoted to actually trying to create an alternative assembly rather than the nation state system of the United Nations. So one of the things that we do look at is this possibility of actually, and this is almost like the first horizon are actual citizens' assemblies. Right now, for example, in Belgium, in Ostbelgien, the German-speaking part of Belgium, there is actually a full-time citizens' assemblies group that the elected parliament has to listen to their recommendations. This is the kind of thing that can lead to a truly transformed global governance of polycentric grassroots power that can then go all the way up to a global. That's a big change we're talking about, but we can begin to make those steps right now. And so finally, I'll just spend a moment to respond to what Ananta was saying, mostly about this notion of power and suffering. And it's so profoundly true. And one of the things we're looking at, really this deep understanding, and so many of us are moved by this, is this recognition of the terrible suffering in the world right now, and so much unneeded suffering. And it's blatant to look at the suffering of those in power who cause and have caused the structural violence to those who don't have the power. But a very important thing is to understand that in our system of patriarchal domination, in these systems of power, these dominator systems, as Rian Eisler describes them, the suffering goes all the way through. Even those who are enforcing these systems of violence themselves have been raised in places where they themselves suffered in order to learn how to be part of that sort of patriarchal system. And there's a quote from actually a Chicago-based sound healer called Sterling Tolles that has really profoundly affected me. And I like to just kind of maybe nice thing to end on before I turn back to you, Lynn. And he said, we must not only heal the suffering that oppression causes, but we must also heal the suffering that causes oppression. And I feel that is the invitation, because it's only by reaching into the hearts, even those people that we see conventionally as the enemy or the ones causing the harm, by reaching into their hearts, by feeling into the suffering they have, we have this potential to go beyond these divides and move towards this world that truly works for all.
Thank you for that, Jeremy, reaching beyond just the suffering, but that from whence the suffering and the domination is coming from. Thank you to all the questions, one's spoken, one's not spoken, one's written. Thank you for your question, Allison. In some ways, I think what you're hearing is that we're offering that it's a co-evolve proposition to the chicken or egg question. And I felt to end in two ways. First is in the book, Jeremy quotes an Indigenous scientist that many of us know and have deep regard for, Robin Wall Kimmerer, who speaks about a gift economy. And then in a gift economy, gifts are not free, but the essence of the gift is that it creates a set of relationships. And that currency of the gift economy at its heart is reciprocity. So I wanted to deeply honor the gift in the spirit of gift economy that Jeremy has given, which is continuing to nurture a set of relationships, both of us here today in the coalition and the open call for others to come in and join, and that it's endeavoring to live truly in the spirit of reciprocity. And in that way, I wanted to close remembering that what Jeremy said earlier, that there is no inevitability of anything. And I'm going to read the very last paragraph in the book as in that spirit. Humanity is at a turning point in its history. We happen to have been born at a fateful time when we can influence which direction it will take. We may never know the ultimate outcome of our collective actions at this juncture here on Earth, but we can devote ourselves to this calling with the knowledge that there is nothing we can do that is more deeply meaningful. With that, Jeremy, the deepest congratulations to you and all your relations and the continued sets of relations that this gift is weaving together. And thank you to Earth Charter, to the Club of Rome, to Yale, to the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and to the EcoCiv Coalition and all of you who've gathered here with us today. Thank you.